Again, thank you all for being here. I want to start here to my left, Dr. Mostert. Dr. Mostert is from Johannesburg, South Africa, completed his undergraduate degree with distinction from the Johannesburg College of Education, majoring in special education and biblical studies. After post-baccalaureate work in cerebral palsy education at the University of South Africa, Dr. Mostert was awarded the master's degree from the University of South Alabama, where he was designated the Outstanding Graduate in Special Education. His PhD in Special Education was awarded by the University of Virginia in 1992. And we'll just go one by one, and I'll introduce each one as before they speak. Dr. Mostert today is going to speak about the current work involving the intersection between disability and bioethics. Dr. Mostert.
Thank you very much.
Push the button.
Buttons are important. Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here today with you. This is my first visit to your beautiful campus. And I also bring greetings from President Carlos Campo, Regent University where I work. And just to like to be part of this very, very austere, august panel. In just a very few minutes, I'd like to set a context here that I think is incredibly important and that reached a critical mass in the case of Terri Schindler. And that was, by the time Terri Schindler was legally killed, we had a set of circumstances that we should have recognized because they'd happened before. And I've done extensive work and study in looking at how the past should inform the future and so often does not. Particularly in the way the Germans treated people with disabilities before the Second World War. And if you go back and read that history, which is not often read, it's a fairly small body of literature, you find out that the kinds of historical events and pressures that occurred there that eventually ended up with what we now know as the Holocaust started not with people who were Jewish. It did not start with people who were gay. It did not start with the gypsies. It started with German citizens who were deemed by virtue of their disability to be, to quote the famous phrase, life unworthy of life. So when we think of the Holocaust, we need to back up and look at how that went. And again, I've written on this, if any of you would like the reference to the journal article that I've done and the website that we developed on that, I'll be happy to share that with you. But essentially, there were 3 or 4 things that I think we need to think about. One is the role of science. Now, obviously, we understand that science can be used for good purposes and for very evil purposes. And unfortunately, what happened in Germany was that science was co-opted to do the work of evil. And when you take the work of evil, but you couch it in scientific terms, and you trot before the public scientists who are held in high regard, what they say and what they do holds great sway among the population. And that's clearly what happened in Germany. The second thing I think we need to look at is the notion of ideas being very powerful. I think in this day and age where we're so bombarded with all kinds of media and all kinds of information, we sometimes forget that certain ideas drive the way people will think about certain things. And what the Nazis did very cleverly was put out all kinds of ideas to train the public, just like Pavlov trained his dog, that people with disabilities were not worth keeping alive. And eventually Germans came to believe that. In fact, if there was one instance that turned what was an idea that the Nazis had into a very grim and horrible reality, it was a 1938 case of a father, a farmer in Bavaria, who had a very severely emotionally disturbed son. He killed the son. And his justification for doing so was the child was causing the family terrible harm. That resulted in a tabloid-like murder case that the Nazis very skillfully staged, and where the farmer got a year's probation for the murder because, basically this kid needed to die, was essentially the sentiment. And then came a flood of requests coming into Berlin, where parents who had kids with disabilities said, gee, this is not such a bad thing after all. We've had all this propaganda for the last 10 years about lives unworthy of living, and I've got a kid who has a severe disability. Would you please send someone to euthanize my child? This was not one request. These were hundreds that came in. And eventually that's what the Nazis did. They took the ideas that they had put out there and manipulated in the public mind, and they set up an entire program. This is before the death camps. They set up an entire program, ironically, at 6 what they called then mental institutions. They commandeered and turned into the first killing fields that we later came to know as the Holocaust. And that's where they developed the gas chamber, was killing Germans with disabilities, not among the Jews. In fact, when this program got stopped, many of the people who had been killing Germans with disabilities then graduated with their expertise in killing to the death camps, where they indeed then burned the Jews and many other population groups. So the power of ideas is very important. The other thing to look at is a perfect storm of things that happen, and you don't see this very often. But when you have, as in Germany, a culture that was very much pro-death, a culture that was very anti-disability, a culture that was very much you produce or you simply don't need to be alive, then you end up with what the Germans openly called people who could not produce and help the economy, and they were termed useless eaters. Useless because they were consuming resources that could not give back. And if you were a useless eater and you weren't contributing to society, then you had no right to live. Other conditions were there as well. Aside from portraying people with disabilities as imperfect, as not being able to live, or not wanting to live, or they shouldn't want to live. The entire devaluation of people and the very clear understanding that some people were quote-unquote perfect or more perfect than others really set people one against the other. When you start to decide in any society that some people are worth more than other people, then you have a very serious problem that can very easily get off track, as it did in Nazi Germany, and as I submit is happening today in the culture of death as we see it. Another point is the complicity of the medical professions. The physicians, by and large, in Nazi Germany were the most fervent of Nazis. And with their authority and their white coats, they were in charge of these killing institutions. In fact, as you'd expect from German bureaucracy, when they crowded 60 or 100 people with disabilities into these gas chambers underneath these asylums, the only person, by regulation, the only person that could turn on the gas was the doctor. Which is obviously incredibly ironic. And it came to the point where doctors openly bragged about this, and Victor Braque, who was one of the chief doctors involved in this, had a wonderful saying that he thought, a wonderful saying he used to go around saying, and it was this: the needle belongs in the hand of the doctor. Now, he wasn't talking about a needle to help you, he's talking about a needle to get you to kick the bucket, basically. And then propaganda, the last thing I want to mention. Propagandizing population is not new, but it's happening all over again. Let me give you an easy example that everybody here is familiar with. We don't like to talk too much about assisted suicide anymore. We call it aid in dying. He who controls the terminology controls the debate. And if I could leave with one thought as people going into the legal field, we need to be able to control the debate by controlling the language. And we've not done a very good job of that so far. If we can control the language, it's not aiding dying, it's not compassionate choices, it's killing people. We have to change the way the general public, who knows nothing or very little about these things, is able to understand it. And we need to give them the tools of knowledge so that when they run into this in their own lives, as Bobby comes across every day, they will be able to make better choices for their loved ones. Thank you.
I was fortunate enough to attend one of Dr. Monstert's presentation within the last couple of years. And if you ever have a chance to see this full presentation on what this, the parallels between what was happening back in Nazi Germany and what's occurring now in the United States, it's quite chilling. And I wish, as with all these speakers, I wish there was more time we could spend on each of these topics. Next is Kristan Hawkins.